back to the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. The Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing new techniques and technology to reduce the impact of destructive wildfires. Joining me today, the amazing Brandon Rigaud. Rigaud, that's French, is that right, Brandon?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. So Brandon is a battalion chief in Grand Pass, Oregon. For those of you who know Oregon, it's right where Grand Pass is. And he also worked for a company that does software called First Do, that I believe is an end-to-end solution of problem-solving stuff for fire departments, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, kind of end-to-end suite for running a fire department's daily operations and reporting and kind of all the other components you need to run a fire department.
Interesting. How long have you been with the department?
So I've worked with the city of Grants Pass for 12 years. And prior to that, I worked for the U.S. Forest Service for 7 years.
Okay. So did that experience with the Forest Service and then coming into the fire department give you, like a bias towards, wildfire as a primary interest?
Yeah, so, coming from, I worked in Region 5 in California for the Forest Service. And when I started looking to test at fire departments, one of the selling points, the differentiators, I think, for me was having the wildland fire experience, having worked on, helitack, shot crews, engines. And so, yeah, definitely coming into the fire department, one of the things they started to leverage me for really quickly was, my experience there for teaching courses and kind of helping streamline the wildland fire program here in Grants Pass.
And how is the program?
Great. Yeah, we've really, since I've got here, we've seen a real change in the environment where we've started to see larger fires with more complexity. And so one of the goals that I had was increasing our awareness on wildland-urban interface operations for our fire department, realizing that the fires that we had in the prior decade were not matching or in alignment with our skill set that we need moving forward. So, started really simple with just, training, new equipment, and then we started to get new assets. So we got, new brush trucks. We have a Type 3 coming here really quickly through the Oregon State Fire Marshal program. And then started to leverage that into more complex drills, training, and they've really paid off over the last few years. We've had, like I said, an increase in the complexity of the incidents that we've had. And that training has really paid dividends. We responded on, several strike teams to, we were on Alameda, which was a large catastrophic fire just south of here. Last year we had several vegetation fires of, 10 acres or greater that had an urban interface component. So the program really has, I think, been really successful. And obviously we had a lot of buy-in from a lot of the stakeholders and cooperators that we work with.
So with the training that you found to be effective, what are some of the aspects of the training that benefited you and that you think would benefit other departments?
Yeah, well, we've really focused on, like I said, on structure protection as a primary component. So we a really good working relationship with Oregon Department of Forestry, and their primary focus is obviously perimeter control and fire, kind of catch the fire small. However, when that fire encroaches on communities, and our community in particular, one of the things that we get tasked with is, structure triage, protection, and then obviously, point to point kind of work. So the training that we've focused on is really how do we get into those homes? How do we quickly triage them? For a fast-moving fire, how do we quickly triage, ensuring that we're maintaining our situational awareness and knowing the resources that we have available? So how do we engage with those homes in a way that's systematic, that allows for the greatest potential of saving life and property, and it works best with our cooperators? And so we really focused on those sorts of things. And over the last few years, we've actually had really successful interagency training, or like a spring exercise, throughout the Josephine County with all the agencies here, which is really, we've seen a huge increase in our ability to, get apparatus into homes, quickly triage them, deploy hose lines, and then, take those, quickly pull those out, move to the next one, triage them, make an assessment, and kind of do that. Whereas, I'd say 10 years ago, we weren't quite as streamlined in those evolutions.
So when you triage the homes, what are the criteria?
Yeah, well, for structured triage, we're adhering to the standard NWCG principles of structural triage. So, we're always looking for Is the home defensible or non-defensible is kind of a primary component, and what the essentially the go no go kind of prep checklist is. And so, is there vegetation close to the home? Is the home, does it have a wood shake roof? There's a lot of debris around, hazmat, bridge load limits. So, kind of looking at those. Obviously, a lot of that work starts prior to a fire.
Right.
We'll talk a little bit more about our kind of Firewise program and where that has kind of helped us. But in the actual component of response, we're kind of looking at those components and deciding, is this home defendable? Is this a non-defendable home? Should we prep and leave, prep and go? And then also do fire front follow. So is it something where we can do some prep work and then, move our resource to an area that's safer and then go back in after the fire front is passed? As and other guests have talked about, one of the primary ways that homes burn isn't through the fire front actually passing the home. It's actually the small embers and things that catch near the home after the fact. And so if we can get in there and catch those right after the fire front is passed, then we're able to save a lot more homes and spread our resources out a lot more strategically.
So when you get in there to catch those embers, where do you find them hiding?
Yeah, so we always look in kind of the most common places. So like underneath decks, in underneath decks, in catches. So like a lot of times we'll see like in attic vents, we'll see them in there. Roof lines, where roof lines come together, so we'll see them in there. Wherever there's pine debris or pine or leaf debris kind of captured, especially on the roof or underneath the side of the house in those areas. And then just in people's stuff, right? People have lawn furniture, wood piles next to the house, so we'll see embers in there. So those are kind of the primary areas we look for. Rain gutters, you'll see them catch in there, and whatever debris is kind of in that rain gutter. So we try to catch those pieces first, and then kind of go from there.
They get caught in the, outside here. They get caught in the spaces between my gas cans out there.
Yeah, well, and we see, in Josephine County, which is not unique to us, but in a lot of areas, in more rural areas, we see a lot of, people have stuff that they need to sustain themselves. So,
right.
Fuel tanks, water, they'll have water lines and fuel tanks and, debris that's been sitting there for 50 years. And so, we'll capture a lot of those embers in those. And a lot of times they'll catch, say there's an old, vehicle that's being worked on or, is dilapidated. We'll find it in there. The vehicle will catch fire first. And then, the radiant heat will actually catch the house on fire. So that's one of the components that we look at in our structure of triage is, how much yard debris is there? Is stuff movable or not? And, if we need to get back in there, what resources would we need to potentially fight a fire before it got to the home?
So homeowners actually have a lot of influence in your triage process by what they do pre-fire, right? If you show up and there's vehicles around the house and debris and a wood pile right up against the house, like that's going to take a lot of resources for you to mitigate, and that's probably going to move them lower on the triage scale versus a homeowner who takes the time in advance to pre-mitigate their property, with proper fire escaping and debris removal, gutter guards, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Grants Pass is like a lot of communities. We have a really active Firewise program, which provides. We have a Firewise coordinator who goes out and does property assessments, essentially looking at those and providing feedback, and then also can provide guidance on grants for fuel mitigation, hazmat disposal, things of that nature. But yeah, that pre-work that homeowners do is pivotal to our operation, just because we don't have the resources that other areas do. So we know we have a limited amount of resources to get in there. And if, a home has vegetation right up on the side of the house versus one that doesn't, we're going to lean towards the one that doesn't, because that's where we could probably have the greater likelihood of success,
Right.
versus a home that's going to require, maybe a 2 or 3 engines or a hand crew to do some work in there, which we may or may not have access to at that time. So yeah, that program's been really successful. We have several Firewise communities in Grants Pass, which are just, groups of homes that have essentially committed to doing the work pre-fire.
Yeah.
And then we're able to use those in our, especially in our high wildfire risk areas. We were able to kind of pre-plan those areas, have access and egress maps, water supply laid out, potential, TRAs or temporary refuge areas where we might be able to stage units. So we kind of have those pre-planned already also.
So it sounds like you have a pretty comprehensive program there between engaging the community and a well-organized response effort.
Yeah, that's certainly something we've tried to kind of develop and foster over the last few years is having the community buy-in. Because we've seen fires like Almeda, or in 2016 or 17, we had the Hugo incident, which was just north of Grants Pass, which nearly, took out a sizable chunk of their community. And so I think the community has really bought in on this. Like, if we don't get ahead of this, there may not be much we can do. And if you look at, the 2020 wildfires across Oregon, they've definitely had a huge impact on, not just us, but the entire state, recognizing that wildfire is here. It's changing, the environment's changing, and fires are getting worse for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And that, people need to be on the leading edge of that, not just expect a fire truck to show up and be able to protect your home.
Yeah, right. And that expectation, I think, is probably responsible for a lot of firefighter injuries. People thinking like, oh, I don't need to be careful, whatever, I'll use my chainsaw, I'll use my lawnmower, I'll, fire up my grill, leave my fire unattended. And if something happens, there's this infinite supply of firefighters that'll just, drop in from Miracleville and they'll take care of it. And it's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, in my really early training in California, watching a video about the Oakland Hills fire, which was in the 80s. And someone saying, like, once I saw a fire truck pull around the corner, I knew my house was going to be safe. And I think that's kind of the romanticized version of what the fire department can do.
Yeah.
And that's really not the case. We have a limited amount of resources that we can plug in. And so, yeah, them realizing that with us just not having those people, and 2020 is a great example. I'll just kind of, out the Almeda incident started in mid-morning in Ashland, which is about 40 minutes south of here. And high winds, RH, low RH. I mean, everything was in alignment with the valley. It was just kind of the perfect recipe for a fire. And, we have the ability to move strike teams between counties, but realistically we can leverage, Crispin County and Jackson County. We can get about 3 strike teams put together and still maintain coverage in our areas. And we went down there as part of that, and we kept calling for resources, but every fire in the state was calling for those same resources. And the nearest strike team to us that we were able to get, the next one was from Portland, which is about a 4-hour drive by vehicle. By fire engine, you're probably looking significantly longer.
Yeah.
And so, just realizing that those resources aren't there, and they're going to take longer to get, and try to plug our cooperators in also. So, utilize ODF. They don't have the same, training as far as structural protection. They're more wildland focused. But yeah, realizing that we're going to need to do a lot more work on the front side.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, it seems to be harder to attract, the size of the labor pool that's required for mitigation. If you're having to, look for crews coming in from 4 to 6 hours away, that's a pretty scarce resource, especially when you get a big fire and everyone needs that resource. You may not be on the top. So you talked about triaging houses, right? Who's going to get the attention first? When you have a limited number of strike teams and many fires, what's the triage process for delegating the strike teams?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that I would look at as an incident commander is obviously where the fire is now, and where we think the fire is going to go in the next hour or 2 hours, 3 hours, and kind of start forecasting that out. And, really when I'm looking at plugging resources in, I'm looking at where is that fire going to be in the next hour, and how long is it going to take to get there? Because if the fire is going to be having overrun a community before we can really get into it, be successful, we probably need to look at the next group of homes. So we're really looking at kind of fire speed and intensity, looking at the proximity to that, and trying to plug those folks into there where it's safe to do so. Also, there's been times where we've been on fires where the fire is going to be in that neighborhood fairly quickly, and we may not be able to get our resources mustered up, put together, and in the community to make to be effective. So we'll look at the next group of homes, and then focus on perimeter control. So last year is a good example of that. We had a fire just north of town off the 5, and there's a lot of values at risk. High school, several kind of community resources, cisterns, water reservoirs, and then obviously homes. And instead of us trying to go to structure protection, we work directly with our wildland fire partners to do perimeter control. So we actually were able to utilize structural strike teams or task force to come in and assist with perimeter control and keep that fire, to 20 acres and not have anybody plug into the structures at all. Just realizing that was the best use of our resources is let's try to corral this thing while it's still off on the hill.
Right. One team doing that and one team, right. Let's corral it. That's team one. And if we can't corral it, team two's already worked pre-mitigating.
And a lot of that stuff too
Yeah.
is done pre-incident for us on the suppression side. That's situational awareness gathering in the morning. What are your expected weather conditions, fuel conditions? What is the shift that's off going? So if we're coming on to shift, what was their experience with fire over the last couple of days? And especially July, August, September, we're getting small fires here or there. What was that doing versus what it did yesterday?
Yeah.
And so trying to collect as that much informational or situational awareness as we can. And there's a lot of tools out there that have been really, beneficial for us through apps like, there's Watch Duty, which has been a really helpful app to a lot of folks because you're seeing live fire information posted from fires throughout maybe your area or the adjoining areas. And so as a battalion chief, I'm able to pay attention. Oh, they had a fire in Jackson County yesterday that, went for 5 acres in the first hour. We have very similar fuel loads. We may expect something similar.
Yeah.
And so trying to just gain as much situational awareness prior to the incident, and that will help us determine where to put those resources at the time of need.
What are some of the other apps that are helpful in predicting fire movement and helping you formulate your plans?
Yeah. So I talked about Watch Duty a little bit, and that one's really awesome. I'll just touch on that too, because that has it's very heavily moderated. And so there's people who are, reporters, and they have a system to kind of vet information. And so it's not just anybody putting information in. But a lot of us also use, Facebook groups because it's community oriented. So they're able to, provide pictures real time pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But again, that information is somewhat unvetted. So you have to kind of look at that with a grain of salt. And then, obviously there's a lot of federal and state resource at their level. So fuels conditions through the GAC. Looking at, the SIT report and trying to collect as much of that information as you can prior to the incident.
And what about modeling? The fire's here, and you said you're most concerned about where's it going to be in the next hour. How do you know where it's going to be in the next hour?
Well, most fire departments, especially smaller departments like mine, we don't really have access to fire modeling. So we really lean on our wildland partners for that. So, the Forest Service or ODF to be able to leverage those resources. So a lot of what we do is probably more, a gut feel or based on our experience of, what are we seeing and what do we think how that's going to impact the line. As fires grow and evolve, then we get more and more access to those sorts of things through our partners. But yeah, most of that stuff is not super high tech yet. Now, having said that, I think that's an area where if we can get that in the hands of initial attack agencies quicker, that would help substantially, and that would be a huge kind of advantage.
Yeah, what would that take to get it in the hands of the people who need it?
Well, that's a great question. I think obviously communication is key here, right? Is having the gateways or the pathways to for me as a user agency to be able to communicate with the agency that's responsible for that. Going back to one of the interesting things that like Watch Duty is doing, for instance, is they're able to, when the new incident comes in, they're able to get that. They have relationships with the Forest Service fire modeling, and they're able to get that information over to them to leverage that. That's not something I may have access to, but if a third party has access to that and then can provide that, that's a situational awareness tool that I can grab really quickly. I know it's been vetted and it went through the right process to get there, and be able to leverage that at real time during the incident.
Yeah.
Other than that, local agency, we have the Forest Service and BLM office here in Grants Pass, for instance. Being able to continue to foster those relationships. So you're only a phone call away from their dispatch center to start collecting that, and provide them the right inputs. That's another component is us understanding the right inputs to give them, fuels, weather, topography, location, all that, having that information so they can plug that into their inputs.
And it seems strange that they rely on you for that information versus, being able to get that automatically through some type of telemetry or monitoring weather stations or right.
Yeah, and some of that is probably some of that does exist, right? They can go to the nearest RAW station and grab some of that data. Lat and longs are going to be provided through the incident through dispatch, especially if aircraft's involved. They're going to have a lat and long already on the dispatch. But yeah, some of that's going to be on the field, in the field kind of components of what are you seeing out there? What are what do the fuels look like? Fuel height density, just because a lot of the aerials and things like that are not necessarily real time where they can see what the fuels look like and et cetera.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information to be gathered in advance or on a regular basis, right? What's going on? How's the snowpack looking? How is the snowpack looking up there?
Yeah, we've had a really, I think, mild winter. I remember at the end of, I guess the end of last year, October, November, we had our kind of regional PIO meeting with ODF and the Weather Service, and they kind of anticipated this to be a warmer winter, and it's kind of come to fruition that we've had a lot of rain, but the snow levels have been really high, and that's created some issues for snowpack. I couldn't tell you the exact percentages that we're at right now, but just anecdotally, I don't see a lot of snow in the hills above us, which usually will tend to lead to more fires, especially later season, as those the 100,000 hour fuels will be more susceptible to fire sooner.
Yeah, so your rain basically hits the ground and runs off, and that's it. That's today's water ration, But the snowpack is the reservoir that will melt during the year and provide continuous water to the area.
Well, that and it prevents the higher elevation fires from occurring sooner, earlier in the
Yeah.
year. And those
Yeah.
are usually the longer duration, what they used to call project fires. Where we spend a long amount of time trying to corral these things, which, those have long-term ramifications. They draw resources away from the more urban areas to go to those fires. They're longer duration, so you may have, crews timing out and need additional crews to go in there. And then you look at, Grants Pass, for instance, we're a heavy tourism area.
Yeah.
And so when you have a fire that's in the higher elevation, burning for a long period of time, that smoke gets sucked into the valley. We get an inversion, and that will then start affecting our tourism, start affecting our local economy. Because now people who wants to go visit some place or be on the river when it's the air quality is terrible and full of smoke.
It's smoke tourism. Like, they have people who travel around the world, and it's like, I want to, check out the sand on every beach, right? I want to breathe the smoke in every
There's
wildfire.
there's certainly time of the year. There's certainly years where that may be an advantageous tourism policy, but I don't know if that's how popular that would be.
There's a branch of fire science now that's really focusing more on smoke as the agent of ill health more than fire, right? That many more people's health is impacted by the smoke than by fire directly.
Yeah, that's actually one of the really interesting things that we're seeing here is especially as these fires drag further and further into the year. When we July, August, June, July, August, school's out, people can leave, right? But you start getting further into August, September, school starts getting back in. Now you have these kids in schools that weren't really, they don't have HEPA air filters inside the school circulating system. They don't have, especially in Grants Pass, we have some older schools which don't necessarily have the best air ventilation systems. And
To
so now you
begin
have
with,
these,
right? Yeah.
right, to begin with, and now you put another, the smoke with, sometimes our air quality is, poor or hazardous. And so, yeah, it definitely has an impact. And, I can imagine as a firefighter, I'd spend a lot of time, for instance, like in Happy Camp, there's smoke in Happy Camp all year, it seems like, especially all summer. And, but kind of expect that it comes along with the territory. You're a firefighter, you're going to be in smoke. But now you're impacting entire communities of, with kids and the elderly. From a fire department perspective, we do see an increase in our, respiratory calls when there's heavy smoke, because there are people who are, more susceptible to asthma and COPD and have effects from that.
Well, let me go back to something you just said about the firefighters, expected to be in an area where they're breathing a lot of smoke. There's not a lot of occupations where you take a health hazard and just say, oh, well, that's just accepted, right? You know, you work in a hospital, you wear a film badge, and it measures how much radiation you're exposed to, and we set, you know, permissible levels for that. What's going on to protect firefighters? Because the idea that you should just expect it to be exposed to something that's going to give you asthma or lung cancer or put heavy metals in your body, like that's not something that we would accept in other industries. How much pushback are we seeing, you know, towards developing better breathing apparatus, you know, that are comfortable, that you could wear all day, but that don't require you to be subjected to breathing, you know, stuff you shouldn't put in your lungs?
Well, that's an interesting question. On the structural side, there's actually been a substantial amount of, I'd say, you know, not necessarily pushback, but a substantial amount of energy that's been put into cancer prevention, occupational health.
Right.
You know, with recognizing that we should be wearing BAs on fires, that we need to cycle people out, having two sets of turnouts, so you're not wearing dirty turnouts, cleaning your gear, cleaning your hoods, cleaning the cabs, airing things out. Even as far as fire station design, with exhaust systems that to expel the exhaust from your bays,
Right.
building bays where you don't have to walk through the bay to get to the living quarters or to get to the kitchen. On that side, I think in the wildland side, you've seen some small. I know there's been a lot of research that's been done on it and recognizing that, and you've seen some small kind of like inroads on respiratory protection with some sorts of masks. I know that probably 10 plus years ago we had something, I think they were called whiffs. Essentially it was like a filter that you would wear.
Yeah.
I think the issue comes in you kind of already touched on it, was the duration of having to, what you're having to do. An SCBA works great for short durations or areas where you have the accessibility to refill them.
When you're not
And
humping that thing up a 70-degree hill and,
exactly,
right,
but you
and
look at
operating a chainsaw, burning 5,000 calories an hour with, yeah,
right, exactly.
cool. Right.
And
Yeah.
when we were on Alameda, there was a ton of homes burning, and I remember I saw several of the other structural agencies who had, they had put their BAs on when they were around the house, and I was like, well, it's probably a really good idea. However, you have 4 bottles in your truck, you have 4 spares, so what happens when you run out? Like it's
Yeah.
that's not a really good long-term solution. But with that being said, after the fact, several agencies actually did blood draws to check levels, because
Yeah.
I know when I left that, I coughed up black stuff for about a week afterwards, which I know was not good for me. Probably shaved some. And I've heard a lot of folks talk about that were on that incident. It was just the volume of stuff that we all coughed up afterwards because the homes that were burning carcinogens. So I do know there's a lot of research that's there, but it's coming up with a solution that's actually tenable for what you just mentioned. I remember, spending a week, 2 weeks on end being spiked out in the middle of a mountain, in the middle of nowhere. Having access to fresh air was, not necessarily something you'd have, be able to cycle out. And it's also not really reasonable to wear something that constricts your breathing
Right.
for that duration of time.
Right. You
So
need
I
some
do
kind
think,
of a lightweight battery, forced air filtration system, right? That that's a positive pressure system that the ultimate CPAP machine or something, right?
yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Something that has some positive pressure but doesn't affect your, like an SCBA, it's pretty restrictive of your breathing. You have,
Yeah, and your vision and you're sweating in it and all that, and
exactly. So yeah, you'd have to have something that's a little bit more user friendly for that duration. I think it's
right.
$1 million idea if somebody comes up with something there and that
I'm
is
working on
actually
it.
usable.
All right, I'll run some design ideas past you, and you tell me what's feasible,
That
because
sounds perfect.
right, it doesn't matter, right? It's like the bulletproof vests, right? It doesn't matter, how big a bullet and fast a rifle round it can stop. If people won't wear it, it's not going to do any good. So you really have to have that user adoption, because it feels better to use it than not to use it.
Well, and I think on the structural side, we saw that change, right? In the early 90s, late
Yeah.
80s, early 90s, like the people, BAs existed, but they were not user friendly. They were big and bulky. And then there was a whole contingent of, of the firefighting population who felt, oh, if you wear that, you're not X, you're not cool, you're not,
Right.
old school, whatever. But we've seen a complete shift in that over the years. On the
Good.
wildland side, I don't think we've seen, the user adoption would be a huge lift there. Making sure that it's adopted, utilized, and accepted as common practice.
Yeah.
It would be
And I think,
unusual for me to see somebody on a structure fire without a BA
right.
now, but
Yep.
20 years ago, not so much.
Yeah, right. How
Maybe less.
old were you when you left the Forestry Service and moved over to fire department?
25?
25. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and what, was that like an average age of folks working forest fires with you?
Well, I'd say that, I just speaking from my experience, I started when I was 18. As, I
Yeah.
worked in Colorado for a couple of years as a seasonal before going to California. I was hired as an apprentice. And, in my apprentice class, it was kind of, there were a lot of, the varying age, but I'd say, early 20s was pretty common.
So the age of
Uh,
invincibility.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Fire's not going to get me. Smoke's not going to get me.
Well, and also it's a time
One
where people are
person's
starting to
fine.
figure out what their career is. This a career? Is this something I'm
Yeah.
going to do for the long duration?
Right.
And I think for me, the kind of the component that made me go towards fire departments was really I had a captain, and I think he was 52 when I worked with him, and so I was a permanent employee working on a hand crew, and I saw him one morning get up, and he'd been on shot crew since he was 18 years old. And I saw him get up in the morning and, he took like 18 aspirin and 20 minutes of stretching to get moving. And I thought, man, this is going to be really hard on my body long term. I don't know if I can do this for that long or that
Yeah.
I want to.
Right.
And so, yeah, so that age of invincibility really came into play where I was like recognizing, well, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe this isn't a good long-term solution.
Yeah. Probably younger people are going to be more influenced by seeing a young person impacted by the health benefits than seeing an older person, because they just take for, oh, well, he's old, of course he's going to be hurting, blah blah blah. But that's not me, but when they see a
But
25, 26 year old hacking up a lung, they're like, oh, that could be me.
yeah, exactly. It kind of puts it in perspective. Now, I wouldn't have traded that time in the world. I enjoyed my time with the Forest Service. I got to fight fire in 18 states.
Wow.
I worked in North Carolina on a shot crew, and we got to spend time in Florida and Virginia, Texas. So gained a wealth of experience that has been advantageous to this day for me, and been a really positive experience on my life. Things I would have never got to see, and so it was really cool to do. But yeah, I think the long term of that is that there has to be a lot of changes made in that agency, or in the agencies, to attract younger folks to stay for the duration and figure out work life balances that are more effective for folks wanting to stay for a career.
Right. Because I think people think about career, as different benefits than an adventure. Right. You can go out and have the adventure. It's awesome. And there's certain people who are, geared towards that and really want that. And other people come to it more with a civil service mentality, and, what are the benefits and what's the pay and what's the overtime structure, and do I get a parking place and like that. Right. So,
That's a great way to put it. I mean, a lot of folks I met, in the Forest Service, who they were there because they like skiing in the winter, and they thought it was cool to, work a summer job and then, go see some stuff and then go skiing all winter. And then I met some folks who are, more like mentioned, like I want to make an impact on a community. I want to be a part of a community. And so, yeah, you can really kind of bifurcate the folks who are drawn to that workforce. But yeah, long term, trying to determine what a career looks like, obviously, retirement, health benefits, and all those other things start coming into play. And, it's been my experience, and, knowing a lot of other people who I still keep in touch with, that's something that impacts them all the time, is, looking across the aisle and seeing state or local agencies making substantially more with better life balances, better work duty locations. And what does that look like for their personal lives
right.
long term?
I want to ask you about those high elevation fires you were talking about, that are more remote and maybe don't threaten communities by fire, but impact their quality of life by smoke. To what degree do you feel like we're seeing a shift towards structure and values at risk protection as a more of a focus, and letting the natural fire ecology of remote areas restore itself with a more of a hands-off approach?
Well, over the last, I guess I can answer this by saying, over the last, I'd say 15 years or so, I remember I had a friend who worked on a wildland fire use module, which has been renamed since. But essentially, their job was to go out there and fire that was away from the population, let it burn for natural resource benefit.
Yeah.
And I remember we had a fire on the Six Rivers that was, a candidate for a fire use because it was far enough away from communities. It was kind of high elevation and was burning in a previous fire scar. And so maybe we could let it burn. And we had some checkpoints and where we might try to corral it if it got to this area or did this. And so some trigger points or decision-making points. And it seems like that had some momentum. But because of the smoke impacts, I remember that fire in particular, Reading had a couple years of getting hit really hard with smoke. And so there was a lot of pushback from stakeholders on, if you let that thing burn, that smoke is going to come directly into us, and we're not a big fan of that. So I think that's had quite a big impact on there, is trying to get the communities to understand that, essentially fire is going to burn in those areas.
Yeah, right.
It's not whether it's fire or no fire. It's when the fire occurs and the duration in which we're going to allow it to. And so in Southern Oregon over the last few years, we've seen a lot of shift towards, larger prescribed or broadcast burns in the fall and in the spring. And, I've heard people complain about the smoke then, oh, smoke already, we're already starting that. But I think over the last few years, you've seen the shift in the community pushing back a little bit, saying, well, it's either now while they can control it and build the buffer, or it's going to be this summer when they can't control it and it's going to be here for weeks on end. And so you have seen a shift in the way that land management agencies are working with communities to try to be more proactive on that.
I think it's really, or you correct me here, but I think that the buffer idea doesn't really pan out so much because the places where the prescribed burns are so remote that they're not actually acting as a physical buffer right around the community to provide, an unburned or a pre-burned swath of protection around the community. Only a very small percentage of the prescribed burns actually protect the community from fire. But one of the benefits that is being seen is a pre-smoke. That if you can create, unfortunately, like long-term low-level smoke by doing remote prescribed burns, then you're reducing the likelihood that you're going to see like massive unbreathable air, because when the fire comes through, everything is burning.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things,
right?
That's one of the things I mean by buffer, is that it's buffering the smoke from potentially coming in. Is that let's get out there now, treat it. I think that the priority, though, has always been in a lot of these fuels projects. I remember working on one in California where it was I want to say it was 50 miles long, and it was essentially along a ridge line. And all 5 years I worked on there, we spent every day we weren't on fire on this fuels project. In the winter, burning the piles, limbing the trees in the summer, stacking sticks, kind of going through that. The priority has always been on making those fuels projects closer to where the values at risk are.
Yeah.
And so I think it would be a huge shift for agencies to say, okay, instead of maybe putting them along the community, let's go out to the areas where they're higher dead and down, higher likelihood of that. The fire that's going to burn prolonged happening. And I think that's also just comes down to, cost, workforce availability. If a project is 3 hours away from the community that they live in, how much work are you going to get done each day?
Yeah, right.
And then nobody wants to be spiked out in the winter, all winter long, in 20 degrees to stack sticks and, limb trees. So it becomes a bit of a workforce issue and a timing problem to get those done.
Bring in the fire robots.
There's certainly, I think we've seen, that's kind of an interesting, piece, is that we've seen a lot of use towards equipment and some of those things, especially heavy equipment like masticators, out there doing there. But what you lose in that is that you have a lot of natural resource damage when you do those sorts of things. They tear up trees pretty good. The soil gets impacted really heavily. Natural, resource, animal habitat gets tore up. It doesn't have that, human ability to say, oh, well, clearly there's something living in this tree. Let's dig a line around it so it doesn't burn.
Right.
And so, you may be able to get a higher volume of work done, but I think the quality of what you're able to get done is not quite there yet.
Well, I guess we'll see a balance on that. Brandon, I cannot thank you enough for the insights you shared with us today, and I hope you'll come back and join me again on the Fire Break. It's Brandon Rigaud, Battalion Chief with Grants Pass Fire Rescue. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, thanks, Steve.
Absolutely. We'll see. I know we're coming back to you soon because you've obviously got a lot more to share. All right, folks, you've been watching we're listening, depending on your preference, for media intake. The Fire Break. We're sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing innovative new technologies and tactics for mitigating the worst dangers of wildfire. Thanks so much for joining me. We'll see you back on the next episode. Take care.